This is tape number ET28 from the library of the Howard Thurman Educational Trust. Two meditations by Howard Thurman. This is side one entitled Creative Order in Life.
Let the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable in thy sight, O Lord, my strength and my Redeemer. I'm continuing from Jane Steger's Leaves from a Secret Journal. About the tree, what I want to know is why the sap ever started to run up the tree, up the trunk, along the limbs, into the buds, to spread them out into leaves. Perhaps the way to find out would be to get inside the tree oneself, a nebulous personality to run with the sap up the trunk, out the limbs, into the leaves and maple keys, and there hear the command to stop. The end is as amazing as the beginning. Why does the urge of life cease with leaves and seed vessels? How does it know when to stop, when its type is completed? If this command to halt didn't come at the right moment, the breath of life that is in the tree might go on beyond leaves and bloom into all sorts of green, fantastic abortions that would spoil the type. The beginning is a marvel. The ending is an amazement. I suppose there was in the mind of God the finished thought of a maple tree, as definite and complete as its spark of life in the seed, although he no doubt sent the thought forth in several types before the present one was achieved. It is a miracle that trees stop with themselves, that maple trees are only apple trees, that maple trees are only maple trees, that apple trees are only apple trees, and oak trees are only oak trees. The urge of life might so easily have flowed on into a green maelstrom of confusion, a sort of wild, crazy quilt of creation. The same, of course, is true of every type. Why do pigs stop at pigs, and human beings at human beings? Or, of course, we human beings still have animal tendencies, and no doubt we are potential angels, but in spite of what we have been, or maybe we are human beings. Each type may have come up from something else and be slowly drifting on to another development. Nevertheless, at each stage, it is itself and not a confused medley. As I sit writing, I'm surrounded by numberless finished articles, books, chairs, tables, desks, all of which were conceived by the mind of man. Then, as I look out into the garden, I see infinitely more things, an innumerable company, grass, trees, flowers, bushes, all of which the mind of God created, and all of which are separate, distinct, and finished, with no confusion, no intermixing of forms. Truly, the finished type is an astonishment. I never really thought of it before. The urge of life always amazed me, but I never until now realized the marvel of its stopping when each creation is completed. It might so easily go on into confusion or shatter the type as a child breaks his bubble by blowing too much breath into it. It might, that is, if at the back of creation was nothing but a blind force. How can anyone believe that? One might possibly if one thought only of the initial urge of life, but surely not when one sees it always stopping in definite forms and definite types. Look at that fat dictionary over there on the shelf, so solemn and well-informed. Do I think that it was created out of chaos? No, I don't think so. Did anyone ever see a trumpet vine forget its type and try to overflow into something else, into a maple tree, for instance? Or a maple tree forget that its urge to life should stop with sharply pointed leaves rather than with round edges of an oak? Nobody ever did unless the types had been crossed by outside interference. What keeps them all so loyally true to their own plan? Surely if there were nothing but a blind urge at the back of them, they would long ago have lost their way in the maze of life and gone off into a confusion of all kinds of chaos. This is a rather extraordinary and exciting notion to my mind, and it is well worth our reflecting upon. It is true that the beginning of life is quite miraculous. As a matter of fact, the idea of beginning is itself, as a concept, almost beyond the grasp of the mind. But as fundamentally exciting as may be the notion of beginning, it is even more astonishing, this built-in quality that seems to be inherent in any particular form of life that tells that form of life how it is to shape itself and when it is to stop developing. Suppose your foot did not ever stop growing, that there wasn't anything that you could do to stop it. It would be quite a fantastic arrangement. But there is built in the very life structure of the body something which in recent times biologists or cytologists more specifically have discovered, and they call it a certain quality in the cell, a coding, C-O-D-I-N-G, a coding in the cell that determines what the development of the organism will be, which cells will become eyes and legs and feet and hair, and what the dimensions are. This is a part of the constitution that is inherent in the cell itself. In reading some time ago about the growth and development of eels, I was amazed at the discovery that some of the investigators were trying to determine why was it that certain eels that came up from the Sargasso Sea, born there 5 miles below the surface of the sea, found their way all the way up to the Atlantic, and some of the eels moved to the right and went to Europe. Some of the other eels came to the United States, to Virginia and North Carolina, to the fresh waters there. What determined which way the eel should go? What determined the European eel and the American eel, as it were? Well, these scientists discovered that the eels that had 11 or fewer vertebrae always came to Virginia and North Carolina. If they had 12 or more vertebrae, they always went to Europe. The ticket was in the vertebrae. Now this means that all of life is fundamentally structured and grounded in order, that there is inherent in the creative process that which, when life realizes itself, its potential has been actualized. Now this gives to us, it should give to us, a very simple but profound confidence in the life process itself. And in my language, it should give us a confidence in the Creator, a confidence in God. For it would seem to me that if all other manifestations of life, including my own body, have this order built into it, why should not the experiences of my life, the growth of my life, all of the things which have to do with my mind and spirit, why should not they then be in accordance with what to me is the will and the purpose, and for my mind, the creative dream of God? Let the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable in thy sight, O Lord, my rock and my redeemer.
This is tape number ET28 from the library of the Howard Thurman Educational Trust. This is side 2, entitled The Great Exposure.
Let the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable in thy sight, O Lord, my strength and my redeemer. I'm reading from Meditations of the Heart. Sometimes there's only a 60-second divide between youth and maturity, childhood and adulthood, strength and weakness, life and death. That life is vulnerable is the key to its longevity. We are surrounded every day by the exposure to sudden and devastating calamity. Despite all efforts to the contrary, there is no device by which we may get immunity from the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune. Here is a man in the full prime of active life with all the strength and vigor of a rounded maturity. Disease strikes. He withers and dies quickly without warning and often without premonition. Here is a carefree, happy child surrounded by all the love that wise devotion and careless rapture can give. A plane crash. Both parents perish. And what at 10 o'clock was a child becomes at 10:01 a desolate creature shunted across the great divide that separates hope from hopelessness, dependence from independence. And thus it goes in one vein. Or here is a person for whom all the lights had long since gone out. The way ahead is no way. A sharp, sudden turn in the road or a chance encounter in the darkness, and everything is changed. Life is vulnerable. Always there is the exposed flank. Sometimes much energy is spent in a vain attempt to protect oneself. We try to harden our fiber, to render ourselves safe from exposure. We refuse to love anyone, for instance, because we cannot risk being hurt. We withdraw from participation in the struggles of our fellows because we must not get caught in the communal agony of those around us. We take no stand where fateful issues are at stake because we dare not run the risk of exposure to attack. But all this, at long last, is of no avail. The attack from without is missed, and we escape only to find that the life we have protected has slowly and quietly sickened deep within because it was cut off from the nourishment of the great exposure. It is the way of life that it be nourished and sustained by the constant threat, the sudden rending. Then welcome each rebuff that makes life's smoothness rough. It is a very commonplace observation to say that we, as we live our lives, are caught up in a pattern of logic and order, reward and punishment, reaping and sowing. So fundamental is this kind of rhythmic balance in the very grain of our feeling tones and our thought patterns, that automatically we elect, as it were, to project this generalization into an all-inclusive way of life, so that when we do something, we expect it to balance itself in something else. I remember when I was a little boy, I broke my arm. It was in the summer. The doctor put my arm in splints, as it were, and for 3 or 4 weeks, I was unable to participate in the things that ordinarily engaged my time and attention. And I wondered why, if I had to break my arm, it would not happen during the school year when I could get mileage out of it. But it happened at the time when school was out and all the wonderful things were going on in the summer. And then I began to go over in my mind, tutored, you see, by this balance about which I'm talking, reward and punishment, action and reaction, antecedent and consequence. And I wondered, what deed had I committed that was of such enormous consequence that it had to be balanced by a broken arm at the peak of the summertime. This notion, you see, that we are in a rhythm of reward and punishment, and it operates sometimes in our working philosophy. We say that if we are very good, then good things will come to us as a result of it. That a good man, a worthy man, a man who has integrity and who lives up to the most far-reaching demands of his integrity, that man would not be subject to the great exposure as a man who pays no attention to these things. Now, this is one of the aspects of our experience. But it does not exhaust the possibilities. It is true that there is reward and punishment, that the law of antecedent and consequence does operate. But as it would seem to me that over and above this kind of balance, or this kind of order, this kind of moral structure, there is what may be called a random movement in existence, a movement which does not seem to take into account the private predicament, the situation of the individual as an individual, but it involves him because he happens to be present and available at the critical moment. The Master talks about this when someone asked him concerning a child that was born blind. His disciple said, "Was this child born blind because of the sins of his parents?" And the Master countered with a very interesting comment. He said, the people on whom the tower at Siloam fell and were killed, were they any more guilty than the people on whom the tower didn't fall? And the inference is, no, they were not more guilty, but they were under the tower, and the others were not. This is an extraordinary something with which we are dealing. There is no protection against the great exposure we as living beings in this world again and again are exposed to the operation of impersonal forces over which we are unable to exercise any control, forces that are not responsive to our wills, however good and insistent those wills are. Given this situation, which is a part of the human predicament, it is within the resources of the individual, and it is one of the tremendous insights of religion, that there is always available in God strength sufficient for our needs, whatever they may be. And this is not some Pollyanna remark, but it is the studied wisdom and the garnered experience of generations of men that the test of life is often found in the degree to which we are able to absorb the hammerings of the great exposure without at the same time destroying our joy. There is in God strength sufficient for our needs, whatever they may be. Let the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable in thy sight, O Lord, my rock and my redeemer.
The preceding program was pre-recorded.